Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora back to read to you from our novel, Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures by Kate D. Camillo. So sit back, relax, and let's get started with Chapter 30. Sunny Side Up. He had never been so frightened in his life. Never. The woman's face was monstrous. Her hair was monstrous. And the word on her name tag, Rita, appeared monstrous to him too. Be calm, he told himself as she poked her pencil around. He held himself as still as he could. And then Rita screamed. And it was absolutely impossible not to answer her long, piercing shriek with a piercing shriek of his own. He screamed, she screamed. And then every one of his animal instincts kicked in. He acted without thinking. He tried to escape. He leapt from the box and ended up somehow exactly where he did not want to be, in the middle of the monstrous hair. Rita jumped up and down. She put her hands to her head. She swatted and clawed, trying to dislodge him. The harder she hit him, the higher she jumped, the more fiercely the squirrel clung. In this way, Rita and Ulysses danced together around the giant dew nut. "What's happening?" someone shouted. "Her hair's on fire," someone answered. "No, there's something in her hair," another person shouted, "and it's alive." "Ah!" screamed Rita. "Help me!" How, Ulysses wondered, had things gone so wrong? Only moments ago, he had been looking at the giant dew nut menu, captivated by the glossy pictures of food and the dazzling descriptions that accompanied the pictures. There were giant donuts with sprinkles, giant donuts powdered, ice, giant donuts filled with things, jelly, cream, chocolate. He had never had a giant donut. Actually, he had never had any kind of donut. They looked delicious, all of them. How was the squirrel to choose? And to complicate matters, there were eggs, scrambled, part, poached, over easy, sunny side up. Sunny side up, thought Ulysses as he clung to Rita's hair. What a wonderful phrase. A man emerged from the kitchen. He had on a gigantic white hat, and he was holding something metal that flashed in the overhead lights of the giant dew nut. It was a knife. "Help me!" screamed Rita. "And me," thought Ulysses. "Help me too." But he was quite certain that the man with the knife had no intention of helping him. And then he had heard Flora's voice. He couldn't see her because Rita was now spinning around and everything in the restaurant had become somewhat blurred. All the faces had become one face, all the screams had become one scream. But Flora's voice stood out. It was the voice of the person he loved. He concentrated on her words. He worked to understand her. "Ulysses!" she shouted. "Ulysses, remember who you are!" Remember who he was? Who was he? As if Flora had heard his unspoken question, she answered him. "You're Ulysses!" "That's right," he thought. "I am." "Act!" shouted Flora. This was good advice. Flora was absolutely right. He was Ulysses, and he must act. The man with the knife stepped towards Rita. Ulysses loosened his hold in her hair. He leaped again. This time, he leaped with purpose and intent. He leaped with all his strength. He flew. Chapter 31, Wholly Unanticipated Occurrences. Flora watched Ulysses fly over her, his tail extended at full length, and his front paws delicately pointed. It was just like her dream. He looked incredibly, undeniably heroic. "Holy bagumba!" said Flora. She climbed on top of the booth so that she had a better view. When Incandesto flew, when he became a brilliant streak of light in the darkness of the world, he was usually headed somewhere to save someone. And Dolores was always flying at his side, offering advice, encouragement, and wisdom. Flora wasn't exactly sure what Ulysses was doing, and it didn't look like he really knew either, but he was flying. "George Buckman," whispered her father, "how do you do?" Flora had forgotten about her father. He was looking up at Ulysses, and he was smiling. It wasn't a sad smile. It was a happy smile. "Pop?" said Flora. There was a long, loud scream from Rita. "It was in my hair!" she shouted. Someone threw a donut at Ulysses. A baby started to cry. Flora climbed out of the booth so that she could stand next to her father. She slipped her hand into his. "Wholly unanticipated occurrences," said Flora's father in the voice of Dolores. It had been a long time since Flora had heard her father say those words. "His name is Ulysses," she told him. Her father looked at her. He raised his eyebrows. "Ulysses," he said. He shook his head, and then he laughed. It was a single syllable. Ha! And then he laughed longer. Ha! 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 Flora's heart opened up inside of her. Do not hope, she whispered to it. And then she noticed that the cook was leaping and twirling, waving his knife, trying to reach the flying squirrel. She looked up at her father. She said, this malfeasance must be stopped, right? Right, said her father. And since her father agreed with her, Flora stuck out her foot and tripped the man with the knife. Chapter 32, Sprinkles. I love Flora. It was in my hair. Sunny side up. Splat. I flew. Where's Flora? Is that a piece of donut? Sprinkles? Chapter 33. Does rabies itch? His eyes were closed. His head was bleeding. Flora knew from terrible things can happen to you that head wounds bleed excessively, whether they are bad or not. All head wounds bleed excessively, she said to her father. Don't panic. Okay, said her father. Use this. He handed her his tie. Flora knelt down. She had a very powerful sense of deja vu. Was it just yesterday that she had bent over the body of an unknown squirrel in Tootie's backyard? Ulysses, she said. She dabbed at the blood with the tie. The squirrel didn't open his eyes. An eerie quiet descended. The whole of the giant dough nut came preternaturally calm. Everything, the doughnuts, the squirrel, her father, seemed to hold its breath. Flora knew what was happening. She had read about it in Terrible Things Can Happen to You. It was the calm before the storm. The air becomes still, the birds stop singing, the world waits. And then the storm comes. Inside the giant dew nut, there was a moment of deep quiet, of collectively held breath. And then someone said, I think it was a rat. But it was flying, said another voice. It was in my hair, said Rita. The cook shouted, I'm going to call the cops. That's what I'm going to do. Rita was right behind him. Forget about the cops, Ernie. Call the ambulance. I have rabies. It was in my hair. You, said Ernie. He pointed at Flora with his knife. You tripped me. That's her, said Rita. She's the one. Plus she brought that thing in here in the first place. Dressed it up like a baby doll. I did not, said Flora, dress him up like a baby doll. And this is all your fault. The criminal element said that sometimes it was wise to put criminals on the defense by making slanderous or blatantly untrue comments. The surprising unfairness of this tactic will often stop criminals in their tracks. It seemed to work. Rita blinked. She opened her mouth and closed it again. My fault, she said. Flora bent over Ulysses and put a finger on his chest. She felt his heart beating in a slow, thoughtful way. Gratitude and relief washed through her, and her own heart, which had been beating much too quickly, slowed inside her chest. It had answered the squirrel's heart with its own measured thud, thud, thud. Ulysses, her heart seemed to say. Ulysses. I'm calling the cops, said Ernie. George Buckman, how do you do? Shouted Flora's father. Is there any reason to call the police? Well, for one, said Rita, it was in my hair. Do you think that the police should be notified of a squirrel in your hair? Said Flora's father. The idiocy of this question, its unsettling logic, made Flora suddenly grateful for her father. She picked up Ulysses and cradled him in her left arm. I think I can feel the rabies coming on, said Rita. My stomach itches. Does rabies itch? Said Flora's father. I'm going to call someone, said Ernie. She tripped me. Whom do you think it would be wise to call in this matter of the tripping? Said Flora's father. He opened the door. He gestured for Flora to walk through it. She did. The door swung shut behind them. Run, said her father, and they both began to run. At some point, Flora's father started to laugh again. It wasn't a ha-ha-ha kind of laugh. It was a hoo-wee kind of laugh. Hysteria, thought Flora. She knew what to do for hysteria. Her father needed to be slapped. Unfortunately, there wasn't time right now. They had to make their getaway. Her father laughed all the way to the car. He laughed when they were in the car. He laughed as he placed his hands at 10 o'clock and 2. He laughed as he backed out of the parking lot and drove away from the giant dough nut. He stopped laughing only once, long enough for him to shout, Holy Bagamba, in the voice of Dolores the parakeet. And then he went back to laughing. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there for today. Stay tuned to see what happens next in our novel. Have a great day.